And this is the closing session of the amazing Asian Bankers Summit in the last 2 years, 2 days, that we've had the opportunity to discuss a whole wide range of different issues. And last session, because the financial services industry is not going to be the same going forward. Everything that you've learned in the last 10 years of the incremental change in the industry, the rules are being rewritten dramatically. And so that's why this last session is very important, because it's also the first session for the rest of your life. What AI is doing to us is throwing out a lot of the back office, and it's also throwing out the interactions that we've had with our clients. The platform revolution that gave us Facebook and Amazon and all of the other major platforms were an easy transition from the manual industry that we were accustomed to in banking. Banking, remember, used to be about going to a place, opening a door, and getting served physically. And then we had digital banking. And before that, we had ATMs, if you remember. And that was an incremental improvement in the way that a physical commodity called cash was handled. And then we had digital banking, and that was an incremental change. The dramatic change that AI brings into the financial services industry is that it collapses everything that we do at the back end, and it hands over the front end to the customer. And those of us who are in banks trying to improve our mobile app will need to be told and reminded that even that is going to pass away, in that the mobile app is now going agentic. In other words, the customer doesn't need you. The customer has handed over the relationship to a device, to a platform, to an interface. And when we look at all that has happened in the financial services industry in the last 10 years, the promise of fintech, for example, in my book, which I keep selling every year because there's still copies available, I make a comment that the banking industry missed a trick by trying to tame the API revolution. In the good old days when API was an extension of banking applications. And today, APIs themselves have been taken out of the banking application and made available to the end user. For me, an API is about little girls designing their own gaming app on the back of a platform already created for them. In other words, your end user is able to decide how they want to interact with you and what they will do with you as a financial institution. So the whole business of intermediation is up on notice. And the panel that I have here are probably three of the most interesting combination of people. Maja Pantic, the head of Meta's center in the UK, who has now moved to the dark side. She's now working for NatWest, and we want to ask her what made that move. I've been waiting to do that. But we also have Wahyu Wrehasnaya, who is the founder of a AI IT company that has been around long enough to see the transition from chatbots. And so we want to talk to him about his interaction with his community. And of course, we've got Steve Monaghan, who has walked the entire route from old-fashioned bank to a new AI platform called Human AI. So let's start this conversation. And firstly, I want to start with asking Maja, where are we in that evolution from October 2022 with OpenAI to where we are today in terms of the developments in Gen AI and Agentic AI.
Okay, so hello everyone. Just to add to what has been said, I'm coming from the NatWest group. NatWest group is a set of banks. Now, back to the question, I'm not sure why you mentioned 2022. Really, the crucial year was 2017, where the transformers, the model that actually is the base model for all large language models, including the large language models underlying ChatGPT of OpenAI, has been released. This model has been developed by 8 people working at that time in Google. None of them remained in Google. Reason being is that when they said to Google leadership that this is something which they believe is the future, the leadership said that that's too blue sky and that they will not be investing in that. 7 of them build different startups. Each and every of these startups is valued currently between $1 billion and $4 billion. The 8th one went to OpenAI. The rest is history. So at this point, OpenAI took the leadership from Google. Then Meta came in just 1.5 years ago. And with their open source idea, actually released Llama, on which not 30,000 people of OpenAI or 200,000 people of Google work. The whole world works on this model. And this is the reason why Llama is one of the most progressive and fastest progressing large language model. In fact, DeepSeek used Llama because it was open source to use tricks. The tricks are called distillation of the knowledge. So you have one network, which is your teacher, another network, which is your student, to build their models. And why this is so interesting is because the biggest problem in the field is really how you train these models and how much GPUs and processing power you need. In fact, if you are looking into the problems of these models, the biggest problem is the energy. And this energy, we're talking about, we need something like 20 gigawatts of energy. That is something like 20 nuclear power plants. Nobody is building that. So really, energy is one of the biggest problems at this point. This is why DeepSeek models are so interesting and important, because they're much more efficient. In any case, where we are now is that there is a battle, obviously, who will lead in large language models. I believe open source is the way to go. There is a problem with open source, of course. It means that, you know, you open this to everybody. People don't like that. And now going to the banking, what's the situation is that a lot of banks, which I have been talking, do not have their own teams that could fine-tune their large language models. There is a lot of discussion of building the chatbots, using OpenAI and so on. You cannot, you should not open your data to OpenAI or any of these companies that are actually having proprietary models, because then you're just feeding them. You're not giving anything back to the world. And in fact, if I am the client of such a bank, I will be asking, what the hell are you doing with my data? That's my private data, right? So this is one of the problems we are facing. Another problem, which I think it's we are going to address, is making these chatbots more relevant. And in which way? Currently, absolutely each and every large language model has turn-taking kind of discussion. That means you ask something, then you get this humongous answer back. There is no way you interrupt that and say, oh no, actually I wanted something else. There is a new choir that needs to come in, right? So the way and everything is textual. And if you think about us as human beings, we do not communicate with each other naturally in text. Text is a human concept. It's a human creation, which we created so that we can leave some of the notes to our next generation. We did not create text in order to communicate with each other. We communicate with each other with speech. And speech in its own right is already a bottleneck. Your ideas, your thoughts are much bigger. And then you put it through this bottleneck. Text is just yet another bottleneck. If you think about text, intonation, how I read a single sentence, where I put the intonation, the meaning will be different. Who I am will change the meaning of this, whether I'm talking to a man, whether I'm talking to a woman, whether we are on this kind of setup, whether we are in a private setup, everything will change the meaning of that one sentence. Hence, the language textual models are not the way forward. This is why everybody is now working on multimodal models, right? Where you're having speech and context and vision integrated into that. So that's the first bottleneck we need to address, so that we do talk with large language models in natural language, which is speech. The second problem is the memory and the context integration. Context is what I said already. It's who you are, where you are, what are you saying, how you are saying it, and why. And we usually just answer one, which is what are you saying, right? And even then we are making a huge mistakes because we're not taking the rest into account. And so the last one, which is not directly related to the financial world, is the modeling of the world. We do not have a good 3D modeling of the world, but for robots, that's very important. So these are that's where we need to progress. And again, coming back to the financial. So once we have these models where we can interrupt the model in a natural language, the next step is full embodiment, where you will have this multimodality shown. That's where I believe the future will lie, and the chatbots, whoever build them, will look like that.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Maya, for drawing for us the roadmap of what we need to see in terms of developments and frontier developments. Now, I want Wahyu to reflect on Maya's comment and talk about your own journey from the time you started with chatbot, which was using LLMs, to in its early days, right? And where are you? And what are your conversations with your clients right now?
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel. So we have almost 10 years of deep experience in deploying LLMs, conversational AI platform, specifically in the Indonesian market. And highly compliant sectors is one of our forte as well, like banks, telco, healthcare also. And back then, we don't have LLM. So we becoming like the principal plus the implementers. Means we develop our own NLP. And
NLPs,
take us like
natural language,
1 or
yes.
2 years just to collect the data, cleaning the data, and letting the machines to understand the Indonesian context. And after 21, 22, we see the rise of LLM, and we simply focusing on the implementation layer, whereas we can simply implement all these highly invested model out there and to implement with the local context as well. And I think the challenge is the implementation from the banks directly or the enterprise with the LLMs. It takes also a lot of challenge in likes of the hallucinations level, whereas we need to develop our own guardrail back then, and also the integrations layer, and also the modules based on the specific use case that we believe that the implementation layer is actually who has the most advantage, because we've done more than 5 years to understand what the real needs of the users, for example. Is it either it's for the internal, is it for the external as well, like the volume, the energy as well. But I think the more forward is that the energy or the development of the LLM should be much less easier. Definitely, I mean we can see the rise of open source, DeepSeek as well. I think those are the kind of like model that we believe the quality is already on par or even above in certain cases, but they have less investments made in that case. So in our case is we focusing on the needs of the enterprise, either to increase the conversions, either to increase the transaction as well. But the most importantly is actually that how they can understand the users more, because back then when they do things manually, we believe that the understandings of the users is quite low, like maybe like certain data points, like then less than 5. When we answering the FMCG, for example, so we give them more than 15 data points, not only like the biographical data, but also the intents, the understanding, and also even the predictions, whether these users can be potential customers or not.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the route that your enterprise clients are taking is very incremental. If any of the elements that Maya was talking about, multimodality, memory, modeling, there's a breakthrough, all the work that you're doing is going to be useless.
I think it's more like helping us. So basically, like for example, document checking, even as simple as recruiting, when the multimodal models that can help us to understand the image in multiple formats, and then help us scoring on based on the needs of the enterprise itself, based on the job requirement, for examples. It helps the current manual process of searching each of the CVs, takes months to understand the sets of candidates. We can do it in within seconds. So
Okay.
it's actually helping us
Yeah.
as well.
Sorry, you go ahead, Maya.
Yes, just to add, it's exactly what he's saying. It's extremely important not to use the LLMs all the way. And the reason why is because of this energy usage. Why would you need for a simple search to use the LLMs? For simple queries, you use exactly what he said, pure retrieval. And so this is extremely important. We need to build, I mean, this is not like, there is a paper who just published, I think it's like 2 days ago, by Beijing University. It is actually talking exactly about that. So how you train, what is the training paradigm of these models is a hybrid training paradigm. When the query is simple, go into search. When the query is more complicated and you ask some kind of reasoning which goes beyond a simple search, then when you need to apply LLM. So just simple from the energy perspective, this is extremely important.
I'm so sorry I haven't come to Steve yet, but this just getting this right is very interesting. Okay, go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually the same thing as well with our case. So we don't implement the whole context with LLM. So we do some kind of like hybrid implementations, whereas the initial that can be done in a keyword base, even
Yeah.
no NLP
Yeah.
required.
So guys,
And but
were banks wasting their time investing in machine learning in the last 5 years?
So I don't understand, what do you mean with machine learning?
Neither
Generative
do I,
AI
by the
is
way.
machine learning.
They paid a lot of money for machine learning engineers, okay, because the customer base is stable. The product offerings were stable. What were they doing? I'm asking this question, okay? Now, let me now bring in Steve. Banks were huge data crunchers. The BIS, the Bank for International Settlement, and BIS2, insisted that banks had to keep 7 years worth of data to start modeling their risk profiling, right? And it took them all of 7 years to get their data right, and even then not, right? So where are we in the architecture of a financial institution? Um, now that Maya has set the rules, right? You don't have to put all your data in there to create LLMs. You don't have to, there are things that you can be efficient about on the energy front and all that. Where is banking in terms of harnessing the data that they already have?
So where are banks? Banks are still at the very beginning, because in many ways, some of the tech's at the very beginning. So I might actually just regress before I progress, right? Because I always like to look at history to understand the future, and I think that's instructive. So if you go back to beloved Steve Jobs, when he created the iPhone, he created a new way of interacting with technology that attracted two new key participants in the technology market. For the first time ever, it wasn't the domain of, late teens to early 20s that were actually understood the complexity of a PC. He actually created something that even a baby could work out how to navigate with technology. And for me, when I look at what's happening in LLMs, etc., now there is a new way to communicate. And I find that incredible, right? But it doesn't solve everything. And I know ED hates when I say these things. What we do in banking is facilitation. We work out how to make a transaction go from A to B. So I ask for a mortgage, I get a mortgage. It's all about facilitating. And so when we go back into the data and this beloved 7 years of data and hopefully more, there's a real advantage in going back and understanding how you optimize that data and how you optimize, more importantly, capital. Because the way that we in banks, if you look at how we manage information and we manage our products, etc., it's all about facilitation, not optimization. And yet the magic is in optimization. How are we able to use what we do in finance to actually create more valuable for the stakeholders in banking? And I don't think that banks are anywhere in that equation just yet. We're getting phenomenal tool sets that help us advance in certain areas, but we're not going back and questioning, why do we do what we do? And if you have a look at it from a data standpoint, and indeed from an LLM standpoint, we're starting with an entry point of here, where many of the constraints in banking actually started millennia ago. We're just not aware of it, we accept it. So if I asked the majority of bankers who have a mortgage, anyone have a mortgage? So rich, La. You only...
Mine is paid up, so.
Most bankers pay their mortgage monthly, right? Now, if you pay your mortgage bi-weekly, you'll probably save about 3 or 4 years off your mortgage. Why? If you were to pay your mortgage in real time, you would probably knock off about 5 years, about 20% of interest, and that's the equivalent of a 20% increase in your pension into the future. Now, many young people aren't really worried about the future and all that sort of thing, but what people are worried about through their entire lives is actually having control of their finances, being able to understand what's going on behind the veil of banking to understand how you create value. And I don't think that we as bankers have really done a good job in servicing our customers to help them create value. When we develop products and technology, we generally do it because we offer some sort of value proposition that's going to make our customers' lives easier, going to free them up with more time to do other things, help them make money, all these sorts of things. When we're just facilitators, I'm not sure we really do that. And so the opportunity that I see in banks using their data and combining it with, LLMs and just pure data and analytics, et cetera, is to be able to move to this optimizational capability, how to help people get ahead in life. When we actually looked at it from a statistical standpoint, we prepared some numbers for the Japanese government. When we started to flow through not just consumers and mortgages, but we looked at supply chains. Why do SMEs give credit to MNCs? Why, when I do business with the Saudi government, do I have to wait 180 days for payment? I'm giving credit at my cost of credit against someone whose cost of credit's near zero. So inside everything that we do, or the majority of transactions, we're actually destroying capital. Does that make any sense? And does an LLM solve that? I don't think it does. I think that what we're arranging now that's super interesting to me, and now I find it super exciting, is we're actually lining up all the tool sets we need for optimization, even out to quantum computing. What is quantum good at? Is it good at straight calculation? No, we use classical computing for that. But is it great at optimization problems? That's where it excels. So all these technologies are coming to the fore that we may take advantage of them to change the game, right? And to create new value for our customers. And that's not answering your question, ED, because I don't answer your questions. But I think that that's the opportunity with the technology that is
Okay.
becoming available.
In short, that's where we need to be going. Steve is already at the product layer. In fact, Maya, since the time you joined NatWest, what have your priorities been? And from what you've outlined as the roadmap, as in what needs to be done on the technology front, what should the priority of a bank be? There are data that is endemic in the institution. The bank also, has external communications. So it's got to make sense of that separate from what it has internally. So how do you create an architecture that helps the bank rationalize what it does on the data front?
Okay, so I joined NatWest 1.5 months ago. So it's a huge learning path that I have to go through, right? However, what the point would be is to help the users do specific things which do not have to be really to the benefit of the bank. And the bank is very aware of that. One of the things is, when a lot of our customers in NatWest stay with NatWest because of trust, and they pay much, much more than they would pay in any other bank. So the issue is that we would need to open that to them, because in principle, they could go to any Google kind of search or ChatGPT kind of search and ask for this information. And it's really bad if we are not providing them with this information. So this is like first thing, which was it's very difficult, but the bank asked me to look into that, which I'm really impressed with, I must say, right? So this is one of the things we will look at. Another thing which is obvious is the operational efficiency. So there is, let me explain one thing. As far as I am aware, Deutsche Bank is one of the biggest banks. They have around 32,000 employees. Do you know how many NatWest has? 69,000. It's humongous. It's humongous. I don't think we need that many people. They don't think they need that many people. The issue is what these people are doing. Can we actually put them to do something which is more useful, So we will look into that as well. So that's really important. Operational efficiency is one of my key priorities. And then you can think about it. My narrow expertise, I didn't say that, and for 20 years plus, a professor of AI at Imperial College London. And what we were doing narrowly is face analysis and behavior analysis. And I'm probably one of the world's best expert in biometrics. So this is one of the things which is extremely important. So access control and how you do this access control. Because as you probably all know, one of the ways the banks currently check that it is you is use third-party software. And which party software it is, it's usually phones. And do you trust these companies? I'm not very sure, because I played with just Apple, and Apple claims to be the best. So if you have a very high resolution image and put it in front of your home, it will open. So it is really important that we do something about that, right? So that's definitely a clear mandate that we will be working on. And there is a few more about which, unfortunately, I cannot speak. But there you go.
Access control is I call it the fun part. It's related to cybersecurity, it's related to customer experience, but it's also related to business models, in that if you look at access control as it is evolved in the last 20 years on payments, for example, the card companies at first, both Visa and MasterCard, absolutely discouraged QR codes, and went into NFTs, which was so hardware centric. And then the Chinese just used QR codes and showed that there's no risk involved at all. How do you think the business models of access control will evolve? How much of that is vendor driven? How much of that is user defined?
Okay, I I think that the banks can play absolutely crucial role. And the reason why I believe so is that we trust banks. We as human beings, we trust banks. Will you go and give your life to somebody? No. But you do exactly that to the bank all your life because our life, unfortunately, is supported by this money. All our life is in the banks. So why we don't trust banks with identity? Because banks did not provide that service. That's the only reason. So I really think the banks should be the ones to support that. And why is this of importance? Everybody is now talking about virtual worlds, about these agents and replica of the humans and blah, blah, blah. So the banks could be, in fact, the ones who can check and be the transactional agency for the verification of people. But one way or the other, no bank in the world thought about it. I
Yes.
don't know why.
I'm with you on that. Yeah, go on.
Actually, the first thing when I got to DBS, I wanted to do what I call continuous authentication, biometric, biobehavioral, biolocational, all that sort of thing, right? And there was an expert who was the guy that cracked the MIT card counting case called Jeff Jonas, and I brought him in as a speaker to DBS on our big data day, and he had. The movie is not correct. It's around the MIT guys winning over the casinos until they were busted. But actually what happened was his software actually was what cracked that case because he started looking at all the behavioral things, John Smith, J.R. Smith, inevitably humans make mistakes. But what he discovered, which I found the most interesting, was the people stick within their habit spaces. Right? So I go to work, I stop at these places, I go shopping at this time. And so there are places that you're actually more secure than others. If you see that someone's within their habit trail, it's very unlikely that they would be, attacked or displaced from elsewhere at that time. So it becomes quite predictive as to the security level that you're dealing with. But, the way banks were looking at it at that time, this was about 15 years ago, it's binary, it's on or it's off. And that's not correct because we live in a much more dynamic environment now. And the threats are growing at a far more dynamic rate than we're addressing them. So for me, that, continuous authentication.
Before that, we didn't have these digital banking systems. Now we do.
Yeah.
And they are on our phones. And on the phone, you're protected. This is your device. So everything should stay in the phone. This is why this expertise and of building everything on device is so important. Of building everything super small is so important. That was not possible 15 years ago. Now it is. It is actually for 5 years already, but yeah, so, I don't know why nobody thought about it, but there you go.
And Wahyu, you're the vendor. So your ability to sell to the banks, device control, these low-hanging fruits.
Yeah, well, the lowest hanging fruit for us is actually how we can help banks, especially to increase or tapping the unbanked populations. And our case is like 100 mil of adults here are unbanked, or maybe like almost half of the adults in Indonesia are unbanked. They don't have bank accounts. They don't have, well, they have mobile phones. They don't have bank accounts, but they have WhatsApp. So the way we help the banks and financial institutions is actually to at least increase the awareness, addressing their challenge. If they need loans, if there's anything that you need to prepare in the 10 or 20 years period, and something that we can help also one of the Bolivian bank that works for us is actually to help them understand about the investment of gold, for example. And then at the end, can convert them as a users, which they can top up in a monthly basis, 10, 20 USD per month or something like that. But the goal is actually that at least to increase the ability for the unbanked population to understand that there is a benefits of banks, product and services, and how they can help those users with their plans and their savings in their life, for example. That's the lowest hanging fruit for us.
Okay. Now, my dream is this. If you look at a traditional bank core banking system, the data sits on so many different layers. You've got the general ledger, you've got the CRM, then you've got the customer relationship side with the distribution platforms and all that. And that's how IT used to be, which is so structured, it's so siloed. You know, Maya, you're like 1.5 months into a bank. You know, how much of that have you seen, and what do you think the future should look like?
So I think that, okay, I think that everything will be running on devices. I think we will not need anymore any of the branches or anything like that. I think that there might be people who will be working instead of branches, helping specific portion of the society that, for example, cannot go. It's too old, doesn't understand, doesn't have the ability to really work with devices because that may be too complicated for them, but not like a single branch, you know, or something like that. I think that would be one transformation. I don't think you will ask mortgages by going to some web form, bank calling you, things like that. Everything will be on device. You show the house, the computer vision recognizes that, sees what is the agency that provides the best price for that house, that car, whatever else. It goes to the multi-agent system. It calculates what is your credit score, what are the things that you need for this, whether you are a good customer. All of this is taken into algorithm, and you are getting a specific personalized, unfortunately, personalized offer for the credit. So
Yeah, you're coming back to what he said.
And that can be, of course, misused. This is one of the issues which is very important. So the transparency and the legislation in terms that the bank has, there must be a law that says of the percentages of the people, for how many percentages of interest rate did you sell a specific product. That's extremely important. And consistently having actually this double check whether any other bank is offering a better mortgage.
Can I pick up on that? One of the first projects we did at DBS was we always realized we had all this data asset, but it was an expense, not an asset. And one of the things that we put forward was that it should be an asset that you put in a customer's hands to make it valuable. So we actually did that mortgage thing. You could put a camera, point out a property. It would give you the entire sales history because we had all that data. It was just sitting there consuming expense, and we made it valuable so we could actually help people get better deals. We presented to the MAS and they said no, because it would enable us to dominate the market. So I kid you not, that was the forward-thinking MAS back then, right? So we got the CEO to intervene, and so we went ahead and did it. But data becomes valuable when you put it in your customer's hands, and we want to give people the control and access over that data. So going back to your architecture question, right, is how we go and architect to actually put data to work and to make it valuable for customers. Now, one thing that we didn't do back then was any of the optimization, which actually there's a book about hyper-personalization floating around somewhere. Yeah. But that's the world we're moving into with these technologies. The ability now to hyper-personalize how we take the data and the knowledge that sits within our servers and put it in a customer's hands and take into account their behaviors and all that sort of thing to help them create value that is sustainable over time. It's not in any financial institution's interest to drive their customers under. And yet we treat them homogenously today. And I don't think that's the way forward. And I think that when you get to an optimization problem versus a facilitation problem, then you're actually now dealing with value creation. So you actually have more to share between stakeholders, which is super interesting.
Ladies and gentlemen, if this has not yet confounded you with not another 10 questions on each of the points that were mentioned, you're not following this conversation, okay? This is a multifaceted conversation.
But you can read the book.
I invented the phrase hyper-personalization, almost, for banking at least. Now, only because of the need of time, okay, we really need to zoom in on the one thing that we can take away. Maya, your work, a lot of it is access control. So let's just stick with that. Simple question. With agentic AI, how does that change all the things that you've done so far?
What is the issue is that I think that we will have our personal assistants. These apps that we are currently having on like banking assistants, they will be personalized for us, right? They will be running on the software that you install from the bank, but it is a personal assistant that remains on your device and it's only yours. It learns your preferences, your way of doing things. You give the tasks, like, for
And
example,
there the data is yours.
the
You're giving it
data
back.
remains on your phone. It's yours. And it should never go anywhere else. There is a limited number of data points that you should or want to allow the bank to use. But in principle, the data should remain yours. And another thing remain yours. Your biometric data remains yours on your device. It doesn't go anywhere else. So this is a completely different paradigm than the paradigm that is used now. I'm talking against centralized databases because centralized databases are very easy target. Distributed databases of the thing that that I'm speaking of are unattackable because you have to attack each and every phone of each and every user, right? In order to take the biometric information. That's extremely important.
So Maya is talking to the end user when she says all that. Okay, which then creates a conundrum for the banks. It's like, how do I get this data? So banks need strategies to try and extract.
So the issue is the bank will probably ask you to share a specific number of data points. It's your right to agree or disagree. There are many banks. The market is open. So this is extremely important. So the bank that offers the best service to the user will be the best bank.
Okay. Only because of the interest of time. Okay, Wahyu.
Let me just again stress, this is my own opinion. I do not guarantee that everybody will agree with this opinion.
Wahyu, I started by saying that, banks missed the API revolution. Now that you're an AI vendor, do you even see yourself as an API provider to a bank? And where is APIs going?
Well, in our case, yeah, the banks has requiring some kind of like on-premise installations, and we even provide our own NLP installations on-premise back then. But now with the rise of LLM, some restrictions might see back then, but now we can provide some so-called like private GPT also installed into their premise in a hardware device, for example. That can be done also. But the most interesting is when we talking about agentic AI is how we can implement agentic AI itself in the use case of banks, where one of the use case that we learn is when, imagine agentic AI is like your own agents of team that can understand the specific task that can solve you with multiple flow process in the same time. So for example, when there's a loan applications comes in, the agentic AI will help to understand the needs, collecting the data points, to understand the reasons of their actions. And the agentic team will basically help with the KYC, with assessing the documents and all the stuff that is doing in the back office, and how the management understand the whole process by having this explainable AI as a method to understand the decision making of this model, how they decide on giving this individual a loan or decide on rejecting the loan applications. So all of the subsets of the process is actually now can be provided and developed by agentic AI, basically. That's why I'd like to add on this.
Okay, so you've turned APIs into an agentic model of your own, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Only because of the interest of time. If this conversation is leaving you totally dissatisfied, that is the intention. Okay, because we're all on a learning curve. The whole business model supporting the breakthroughs that are taking place in AI right now are being created, even as we speak. So I'm going to ask for one last comment from each of you on generative AI. I think we understand LLMs. We read about them in the newspapers every day. But Gen AI and the business of banking, um, give us a top of mind last words on where this is heading and how do institutions rationalize generative AI? Because generative AI is about creating meaning out of the data that you have.
I think that this is a unique time in history because of this, because for the first time, I can talk to a customer not in my language, but in their language. If I'm speaking to a laborer, I'm going to have a very different explanation of how finance works than if I'm speaking to a PhD. So to be able to speak in a way that you're understood and to help customers understand finance and what they're getting into and how they build and wealth over time and all that sort of thing, I think is the miracle of what's happening with this technology. And I think that the future looks very promising if we use it in the right way to create that value for customers. So it's a regulatory requirement that customers understand what they're buying, but we've never been very successful at actually doing that and fulfilling that obligation. But this, because of the ability to hyper-personalize communication and to help people understand both the math and the products that they buy, I think is creating this unique opportunity that's yet to be delivered, but has huge promise.
Maya?
I don't know what I do with this mic. Okay. So, generative AI are LLMs. Generative AI is the use of the generative models. And generative models are the basis of LLMs. So I do not say generative AI will not go beyond LLMs. It will, in the ways I already said, like this memory, that's not a part of it, and the 3D model and so on. And multimodality, really full multimodality is still not in, right? So, but if we are thinking about what generative AI will do for the world, it will change it completely. We have seen that 2 Nobel Prizes went to people who built these models, and rightly so, because
Medicine, yeah.
It's in medicine and in what was
Jeff Hinton, yeah, physics, yeah.
The physics, right? So it's really important. That means that you can do things that you could previously not do. So the markets will be also extremely different because you can do things faster. Innovation can go faster. Think about pharma industry. This is very important because drug discovery goes now based on simulations. It does not go based on the trials. This is so important because you speed it up in months, in numbers of months. So it's like 6+ months speed up, right? It's usually year plus speed up. So that's the first thing. So innovation will be much faster. Thinking about banks, you have to think about new investments in this way, right? So the investments should not be classical investments that previously the banks were doing. This is changing the world. So that's, in my opinion, very important. The secondly is exactly +1 on what Steve said. Everything will be personalized. So we will not have to worry about the loss of languages, for example. We are currently using English in this forum. We are using English as the main language. In my world, the world which I expect to be there in 5 years, I don't know if you noticed, OpenAI made a deal with IO. IO was built a new startup by a guy who actually designed iPhone, Mac, and this Apple Watch. So he started a new company, hardware company, and now they came together. That means OpenAI is going to build hardware. If that is our future, what is happening is that you will have probably augmented reality glasses that which you will have in these glasses, like meta glasses, you have the microphone here. So really, it goes directly into your bones, so you hear things. So what will happen? Your glasses will portray me as speaking your language, and I will look at you and you will speak your language, but I will hear you either in English or in Dutch or in Serbian, depending of my mood, right? I speak these languages. So in principle, this is very important because people will be able to communicate completely naturally. Our mother language is the only language which we actually have a full comfortability to express fully our thoughts. So that's why this is so important, right? Because when you are doing a translation to another language, it's always more difficult, right? So this personalization is extremely important. It will go much beyond that. It will go to the personalization of everything. Forget the faculty, the universities. I'm a university professor, okay? It's bad news for me. Very bad news. But universities will not exist in the way they exist now because people will be learning with their personal assistants. But our kids are already doing that. So really, who will come first with this kind of application that the kids will adopt easily will be a big winner. I'm talking much broader than the banks, but the banks have to think about investments because this is really important, right? And then there will be further thinking of once you have this kind of everything is done by this generative AI, how we as human beings, what will be our main thought and concern? And what will be the main topics on which we will focus? It's probably still our happiness and how we could, live our life in a satisfactory manner. But as we all grow in terms of education, that's just natural, our natality will drop down because we will simply be much more advanced and people will not have these 10 plus children that some of the countries still have, right, per family. So what will happen is that we will miss power, working power, and that humans need to be much more productive. Generative AI will increase this power. How you as a human being, one human being, can produce much more because you will not need all the summarization, all the things, all the knowledge that you want will be there on your fingertips, right? So you could use that much more efficiently than before. But in principle, that would also mean that we need to invest in robots because we need physical power and we will not have this big population. Actually, we will have much bigger, older population. So there you go. Elderly care comes as a next one. So those are the things that you as bank people need to think where to invest. Those are the long-term goals. And your short-term goals is protect your clients and protect your data. That's the most valuable thing that you have. The data is the biggest market that very few companies tapped in, very few, and almost zero banks. And banks can be huge brokers of the data, but they are not.
There was digital anthropology. That means the title of my book is The Personalization of Finance is Here. The title of my next book is The Personalization of Everything, as I gather from Maja and Wahyu.
So for me, it's quite short. So think of AI is not only as automation, generations, but also prediction engine. So basically to help banks with predicting the users.
Oh my goodness, that's a whole topic by itself, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Predicting the user behavior for, is it a potential churn, potential customers, and for the internal process as well, like understanding the
That was what
vendors.
machine learning was supposed to be for, by the way. Okay,
Definitely.
go on. Yeah.
And I think banks worth to notice that it should be a potential investments because it's been done in DBS when Steve mentioned about DBS. But we understand this DBS has been successfully decreasing their churn rates, also increasing the upsells by implementing these predictive engines, so-called AIDA, artificial AI for data analysis or something. Yeah, so I think that's one of the use cases that banks needs to maybe do some benchmarking, but definitely from my end is the prediction capability is what we should aim for as the next of AI. I think that's for me.
As you have heard from the panel, a lot of what we are looking at on the generative AI front is work in progress. It's not just because Maya is only 2 months into a job, but the institution itself is trying to make sense of it. And it's interesting to listen to Maya talk about modeling and Wahyu talking about prediction, predictive capability of AI. And that's where we want to head to. We want AI to give us meaning, and we want AI to help us project into the future. As all of this is happening, the technology itself is being handed over to the end user. And Maya kept saying personalization several times in her comments. And that's the business model that we need to contend with. Finance is not business as usual, and we need to start thinking about what our products will look like. And here's where what Steve has been, from the word go, he went right into the products and said, if your products don't look different, you haven't even started innovating. In fact, that's what I say in my book, by the way. If the product hasn't changed, nothing has. And these are the initial comments that we have to guide us in a continuing conversation or in a continuing building of our own thinking of where AI is taking us. And in the next 2 weeks, there may well be an interesting breakthrough in generative AI. In the next 2 months, there might be another breakthrough, and so on. And there are breakthroughs both in the efficiency of the models that are available, as well as the substance of the generative AI capability that's being created today. So it's both work in progress. At the same time, it forces us to remodel on the go. And one of the reasons we had Wahyu on the panel was because companies like his has to make money as the technology is evolving. And so he has to figure out at which point does he engage with his clients and what it is that they buy from him. But even there, the question is a wrong one because a lot of the technology can be self-generated. Within the institution, where should generative AI sit? In fact, I wish we could have a conversation on that, because can it sit on the technology front or on the business front? In other words, can you put generative AI tools in the hand of the end user in the institution, the business owners? I'm dying to ask this question. I wish, you know what? Let me ask this question, if you just bear with me, because the answer to this question is very, very important for the institution. So may I have a very quick comment from all of you on that one? Where should generative AI sit in an institution?
Absolutely in the hands of every domain expert in the bank. If you take the amplified intelligence, now there are tool sets that you can use to create applications that, the programming language of the future is already there. It's in your own language. So if you're able to now leverage the expertise you have in the bank and be able to have synthetic private data of the whole bank, you can model out to market products and have them ready for finessing by technology. I think the role of technologists will change, that they'll be finessing and putting all the security rails around it. But the future of technology is in the hands of the experts. And that's why I always refer to amplified intelligence, not artificial intelligence.
Maya?
It depends when we are talking. If we are talking now, I think still you do need experts to make something out of these models, especially, the training and so on, because you do not start with large language models to train them from scratch. You have to fine tune them. So you need to know how to do that. But in principle, once we go beyond that, once we have the models, I absolutely agree with Steve. It should be absolutely with everybody. And however, one thing which I'm always very worried about The guardrailing needs to be very good, and we need to invest a lot in guardrailing. There are papers and papers and papers that are actually explaining that the guardrailing that we are doing always have one or the other hole. So it's important to think about these guardrails, because they are just programs, algorithms, so they would tell what you tell them to tell. So if you do not tell them don't tell, they will tell, right? So it's important to just know to build these kind of guardrails around the models. But once we go over that, I think that yes, +1 on Steve, because the productivity will be humongous.
The longer this conversation goes, the more important points that are being thrown up. Anyway, last point, Wahyu.
Yeah, should be on all divisions for my end. It can, because LLM AI can be implemented for internal use case, external use case. But the most important actually that goal also is actually to not only utilizing the internal data, but also increasing the data points as well, with the ethics as well, definitely asking for consent and stuff. And I think that's the most important, because as we mentioned about AI, the key is actually the data source. The challenge is the data fragmentations. And not only the data needs to be, clean up from the data lake, but also like the LLM chatbots interface can help to increase the data points that is missing from those data lakes, for example.
Thank you very much. That was a very good addition to the question that I asked. Ladies and gentlemen, innovation, personalization, productivity, and prediction. This is where we are. These are the handles by which we think about generative AI. And if you are totally dissatisfied with this panel, you ought to be, because you should leave this place with even more questions in your mind. This could have been a technology conversation, and there is a business element at the back of that. But most of all, in the way that Maja puts it, there's an anthropological element. It's changing life as we know it. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking this panel as we conclude. And it now gives me great pleasure to invite my erstwhile friend, Gordian Gaita, whose job it is at the end of every summit to have walked through all the different sessions and give us a conclusion for the entire summit. Gordian Gaita, please.
Thank you very much. It gets more difficult every time, I have to say. But this particular summit, if I have to summarize that, and I can't approach the stratospheres of the discussion here, I had two observations. First one is that for the very few time, this conference was dominated by solutions. Almost everybody who presented had a solution. We have solutions sitting here. There were ideas. And one of the main conclusions is almost every challenge that banking is facing now or has faced has a technology-enabled solution. So we are making enormous progress towards getting to a better world. At the same time, solutions cause new problems. So what I heard a lot was a lot of complaint, and half of it's about the regulator. So we should include regulators in the conversation so we have somebody to attack. Half of it was regulation. Half of it is security and internal concerns. And half of it is just your comfort zone. The greatest enemy of development is your comfort zone. Most people have a limited comfort zone. And the last 1.5 days, we heard half of what we heard was outside our comfort zone. So we face resistance. So the other takeaway is that don't get bamboozled by things that you don't understand. Do like our chairman, write a book about it, then you understand it. That is very important. There are two things that I would conclude from there, from what I heard, as a recommendation to the banks. First of all, I urge you to recognize that financial institutions and banks are not all the same. They're all different. They have different segments, different emphasis, different core. They operate in different regions. So there is not one silver bullet. None of the sensational technology developments are a silver bullet. So for everybody of you, it starts to look at what is your strength, what do you want it to be, what is your lever in terms of performance, and what is your downside in terms of risk. When you can summarize these 3 or 4 key points, you will find readily available technology. And the conference has introduced a solution to every one of them. And if you look at a bank has a back office, a middle office, a front office, and it has a range of disciplines, sort of regulations and efficiency operations. Try and find the areas that you actually think you would benefit most. Because please, don't forget 2 things. One is, and I write a book about that, is the tyranny of technology. We are approaching times where technology is going to dominate us, tell us what to do, and limit us in the same way that it will become limitless, as Maja pointed out. And the second thing is technology is expensive. Now, of course, there is a cost, but investment in technology is not a cost. It's an investment. And an investment has a return. So if you look at who you are, where you want to be, and where you want to make an investment, it's no longer an issue. It's only an issue if you want to be competing in all arenas of technology. And as our chairman said, technology changes all the time. Every now and so often there is a new fundamental development. Every now and so often there is a new marginal development. And yesterday evening we talked about quantum computing. That's sort of, for me, when I'm in my grave, quantum computing will be available commercially. So focus and harness the technology to your specific needs, and not to be able, and not to feed the buzzwords, not to say that, we use artificial intelligence. Who cares? You will be able to make a quantum leap with an intelligent investment using what you heard these 1.5 days. You don't need more. Everybody was here. Every problem was addressed. Every solution was presented. Just focus on what actually matters to your organization, not to the others, but to your organization in your business arena. And if you do that, there are no limitations. Technology is an enabler. It's a bit like the stage here. It has no meaning, but as an enabler, it can push you beyond all of the limits that you perceive and beyond anything that you feel constrained by. So this conference was a little bit different in the sense that it was very, very solution-oriented. I think anybody who talked to somebody else got some new ideas, some new perceptions, some approaches that were not considered. And I think this was pretty sensational. We had some sensational panelists and some very, very good contributions. And the conference organized in transformation, transaction, and the risk Olympiad is exactly that. Those are the 3 themes that matter. And here we brought the solutions. Now, of course, Maja and the panel here are sort of at the way end of the world. for us mortals and imbeciles like me, medically speaking, we actually have simpler solutions. But we heard them all. And so I would conclude that this was probably one of the most forward-looking, most solution-oriented, most helpful summits that we have had, because we didn't spend so much time on problems. We spent a lot more time on solutions. So I think Asian TAB, although I'm sort of associated with them, has done a great job, and I would congratulate them for that. And I thank all of you participants who actually add life to that and interest. Everybody I met here was interesting and enjoyable, and that makes it a very, very unique summit. So we hope, we thank you all, and we hope to see you again very soon.
Maya wanted to respond to something, no? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure in calling the summit to a close. I always like listening to Gordian's final comments because it's him processing in his mind what he thought he heard this year. And just as I was listening to him, I realized that he was right, in that there was a time when banking was about handling problems. We would come to a conference to talk about Basel II, Basel III, what the regulators are putting in place, and how do we cope with what the regulators are telling us. That era is over. We are now thinking about how to cope with what the future is opening up for us and the possibilities that are in front of us. And that was what the last conversation was about. In having built the Asian Bankers Summit from the year 2000, I have seen how this summit itself is a story of how the industry has been changing. In fact, from about 2016, when the regulators themselves were creating their own fintech festivals, we looked like we were going into decline because all the conversations on innovation, on disruptions were being taken away from us into the fintech realm. And then guess what? The regulators tamed the fintech community. They removed the word disruptors. They made the fintech players to start to apply for licenses that made them look like banks. And then the conversation came back to our table. And so when you attend the Asian Bankers Summit today, you're actually coming back to the home of banking, where bankers hold the trust of the community. And in fact, it was said in this panel, this last panel, this is the one thing that the banking industry didn't lose, and that was trust. And this is exactly what will be required to harness everything that AI will have in front of us. And that's why the theme of this conference or this summit, AI is here to stay, is a homely theme, a theme that brings us back to the essence of what it means to be a bank, to be a trusted entity in a changing world. I would like to thank all the speakers, all the panelists. I'd like to thank my staff who do a marvelous job every year in holding this summit together, of which I am also a beneficiary by meeting all the different people who bring together. The Asian Banker is now called TAB Global because we are global in our reach. We run programs in Africa, in the UK, in Silicon Valley. We have a Silicon Valley study tour that we run every 2 years or so. The next one is next year. And we are in Japan, in China, and so on. It's lovely to be global because we don't know where innovation will come from. And we hope to build on this global agenda of transformations that are taking place that all of us can learn from. And it's wonderful to meet people from different parts of the world. We have much work to do to make this summit even more international than it is. It is a function of the mechanics of the funding behind it and all of that. But we hope that you will grow with us, give us your feedback, and help us to build on this. Next year's Asian Bankers Summit will be held in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and we hope to see you there. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and all the very best in what you're building.